There is a single photograph that encapsulates an entire town's worst nightmare. A simple, domestic, innocent image, and yet, for more than 50 years, it was the ghost of Millbrook. A 3-year-old girl, curly brown hair, a floral dress, clutching her teddy bear with the kind of smile only children possess. That sepia-toned photo would be the last memory of Emily Carter before she vanished in October 1966. But what no one realized for decades was that the photograph wasn't just a memento. It was a piece of evidence. And 58 years later, it would finally give up the secret that turned heroes into monsters. This is the story of how an entire town celebrated a killer while searching for a ghost. The autumn of 1966 arrived in Millbrook, Ohio, painting the trees in golden hues as the small heartland town prepared for another quiet winter. 3,000 residents, churches on every corner, unlocked doors, children playing in the streets until sunset. Millbrook was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where the community's heroes were teachers, police officers, and pastors, where evil simply didn't exist. Or so they all believed. The Carter family personified this American ideal. Thomas, 32, had worked at the local factory for 10 years. Margaret, 28, was the heart of the home, an active member of the Baptist church who cared for little Emily with absolute maternal devotion. Emily Rose Carter, 3 years old, was the couple's only child, born after years of trying and praying. With brown curls that fell over her shoulders and honey-colored eyes, Emily was adored by everyone in the neighborhood. She always carried her inseparable brown teddy bear, a patched-up toy with one slightly crooked eye and a faded red ribbon around its neck. She affectionately called him Teddy, and on stormy nights she could only sleep if the bear was held tight against her chest. The iconic photograph had been taken in September. Margaret had sewn a new dress, white fabric with blue and yellow flowers, a handmade lace collar. In the backyard, under the golden afternoon light, Thomas captured that moment. Emily sat on the wooden steps holding Teddy to her chest, smiling with the absolute confidence that only exists when you still believe the world is safe. 2 days before that photo was taken, Emily had played on that same living room rug, laughing as she made Teddy dance for her mother. No one imagined that portrait would be reproduced thousands of times, pinned to posts, printed in newspapers, burned into the collective memory of a nation. That her smile would become the symbol of the impossible. It was Tuesday, October 18, 1966. The day began like any other. Thomas left at 6:30 in the morning, lunchbox under his arm, kissing his wife and daughter before getting in the car. Margaret made coffee, gave Emily a bath, and tended to household chores, while the little girl played on the kitchen floor. The sky had been gray since dawn. At 11 o'clock, the rain began. A fine mist at first, quickly turning into a downpour that drummed on the roof and darkened the windows. Margaret was tidying the living room, folding clean laundry. Emily was playing on the rug with Teddy and her dolls, creating little stories in a low voice, the way children do when they are completely absorbed in their own world. At noon, the telephone rang. It was Helen Morrison, a neighbor, asking about the church fundraiser that weekend. Margaret went to the kitchen to consult her notes. The conversation was quick, practical, routine. 7 minutes. 7 minutes that separated the before from the after. 7 minutes that split Margaret Carter's life, and all of Millbrook, into two irreconcilable pieces. When Margaret returned to the living room, hanging up the phone, she noticed the silence. A wrong kind of silence. "Emily?" she called, her voice still casual without alarm. "Nothing." "Emily, honey?" She ran down the short hallway, pushed open the bedroom door. Empty. The bed still made, toys in their place. She returned to the living room, her heart beginning to beat differently, the kind of beat that comes before you consciously understand that something is terribly wrong. And then she saw it. The back door was ajar. The lace curtain swayed in the damp wind. Raindrops on the wooden floor, forming small, irregular puddles. And there, lying near the door, half soaked by the incoming rain, was Teddy. The bear Emily never let go of. The one object in the world she would take with her anywhere. especially when she was scared. The sound that tore from Margaret's throat didn't seem human. Helen Morrison heard the scream through the still open line and ran barefoot in the rain, crossing the drenched yard. When she came through the back door, that damn door that would never again be just a door, she found Margaret on the floor, clutching the wet teddy bear to her chest, screaming her daughter's name. Within minutes, the news spread like wildfire. Emily Carter had vanished from inside her own home while her mother was only a few feet away. Sheriff Earl Hayes arrived in 15 minutes, his uniform not yet fully buttoned, bringing 2 deputies. Thomas was called from the factory. When he walked into his home, pale as death, he saw Margaret sitting on the sofa, motionless, clutching Teddy. Her eyes were dry. She had moved past crying to a place where shock paralyzes even tears. The door-to-door search began immediately. By 3 in the afternoon, the operation had escalated. The county sheriff called in every available man. Volunteers arrived from neighboring towns. K-9 units came from Cincinnati, but the rain had washed away any scent. By the time the sun set on Millbrook that Tuesday, 200 people were combing every inch of the small town. Flashlights cut through the darkness. Hoarse voices shouted "Emily" until they were raw. The lake was dragged. Wells were inspected. Barns were overturned, board by board. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Some of the men leading the searches that night would, decades later, be remembered in a very different light. But at that moment, they were all heroes, all potential saviors. Millbrook had chosen its heroes, and they were all looking in the wrong direction. On Wednesday, a helicopter flew over the surrounding forests. Volunteers formed human chains in the dense woods, calling, searching, praying. The Baptist church became an impromptu operation center, with maps tacked to the walls, lists of searched areas, and hot food for the exhausted searchers. Margaret didn't sleep. She didn't eat. She remained seated in the living room, staring at that back door, as if sheer force of will could bring Emily back through it. Sheriff Hayes had put Teddy in a plastic bag as evidence, but Margaret begged, pleaded on her knees to keep with her. Hayes relented, against protocol. She pressed the damp bear to her face, feeling the tiny indentations left by small fingers, smelling the scent of rain and childhood. It was all that was left of her daughter. She didn't know, no one knew, that it wasn't just a wet toy left on the floor. It was a clue that no one could read. Not yet. On Thursday, reporters from Cleveland, Columbus, and Pittsburgh flooded Millbrook. The sepia photograph was reproduced in dozens of newspapers. 3-year-old girl mysteriously vanishes in Ohio. That angelic smile, those curls, that bear contrasted cruelly with the living nightmare. The police focused on outsiders, truckers who passed through town, traveling salesmen, a group of hippies who had camped near the lake weeks earlier. Every stranger was tracked down, questioned, investigated. A driver from Baltimore with a history of child abuse was interrogated for 8 straight hours. His alibi was solid. He was in Toledo, 200 kilometers away, making documented deliveries. Every lead went nowhere. There was no ransom demand, ruling out financial motive. Thomas and Margaret were quietly investigated. It's always the family first, but they were just what they appeared to be, a couple shattered by the unthinkable. As days turned into weeks, a collective paranoia settled over Millbrook. Mothers wouldn't let their children out of their sight. Doors got new deadbolts. Windows were locked even in the heat. Trust was replaced by suspicion. Fear took up residence as a permanent resident. That autumn, it wasn't just Emily who disappeared. The town's innocence vanished through that back door too. And somewhere, Emily Carter was alone, far from the mother who loved her, far from the father who worked so hard to give her a future, far from the teddy bear left on the threshold, as if she had tried to hold on to it until the very last second. For Margaret and Thomas, every minute was an eternity of torture. Every morning waking up to the impossible reality. Every night wondering where their little girl was sleeping. If she was sleeping. If she was still. No one said the word aloud, but everyone thought it. Millbrook would never be the same town again. The question that haunted every mind, that echoed in every whispered conversation, that kept people awake at night was simple and terrible. Where was Emily Carter? But there were other questions buried deeper that would take 58 years to surface. Who came through the back door on that rainy day? A stranger taking advantage of the storm? Or someone Emily knew so well she didn't even need to scream? Why was Teddy left behind? What happened in those seconds between the living room and the door that made a 3-year-old girl drop the one object that made her feel safe? And the most terrifying question of all, how many times did the person responsible join the search, hold Margaret's hand in solidarity, look Thomas in the eye and offer hope, all while knowing exactly where Emily was? The answer would be more shocking than anyone in that dreaming Ohio town could have imagined in those first desperate days of October 1966. Because in Millbrook, the monster wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was standing in plain sight, wearing a hero's badge. In the first 72 hours after a child's disappearance, every minute counts. Every second can be the difference between life and death. Millbrook knew this. And that's why, when one man stood out among all the other volunteers, when someone showed tireless dedication, unshakable courage, and infinite compassion for the Carter family, the entire town embraced him as its hero. His name was Robert "Bobby" Jensen, and for 58 years, no one suspected he was the exact opposite of what he appeared to be. Robert Jensen was 34 years old in October 1966, tall, with neatly combed brown hair and blue eyes that conveyed sincerity. Bobby, as everyone called him, was one of Millbrook's most beloved figures. He had worked as a janitor at the local elementary school for 12 years. The children adored him. He always had a smile, a piece of candy in his pocket, a kind word. He lived alone in a modest house on Maple Street, just 4 blocks from the Carters. He had never married, which some of the church ladies considered a shame, as Bobby would make a wonderful father. He attended the same Baptist church as the Carter family. He participated in bazaars, community festivals, and charity raffles. He was, in every sense, a model citizen. When the news of Emily's disappearance reached Bobby Jensen on that rainy Tuesday, he was at home on his day off. Witnesses would later report that he was one of the first to volunteer for the search. He arrived at the Carter house at 2:30 p.m., just 2 hours after the disappearance, offering his services to Sheriff Hayes. And Bobby didn't just volunteer. He became tireless. In the first 48 hours, Bobby Jensen barely slept. While other volunteers took turns, exhausted, he kept going. He searched the same places 2, 3 times. He coordinated search parties. He brought hot coffee to those searching in the cold rain. He comforted Margaret Carter with words of hope. "We're going to find her, Margaret," he would say, holding the devastated mother's trembling hands. "We won't give up. Never." Thomas Carter would later describe Bobby as the best friend we had in those terrible days, the man who didn't leave them alone, who prayed with them, who cried with them. In the first week, Bobby brought homemade food for the family. He helped organize the donations that began to pour in. He stayed up late helping to catalog, reported sightings, make calls, and coordinate volunteers. Sheriff Earl Hayes was so impressed with Bobby's dedication that he gave him a sort of semi-official role in the investigation. Bobby had access to the operations center at the church. He saw the maps. He heard the reports. He knew exactly where each team was searching at every moment. And while everyone desperately searched for Emily Carter, Bobby Jensen maintained a stunning calm, a serenity that everyone interpreted as strength, as unwavering faith. No one realized it was control. In the second week, as the intensive search began to wind down, not out of surrender but from exhausted resources, Bobby became the Carter family's primary emotional support. He visited them daily. He sat with Margaret for hours. She trusted him completely. She shared her deepest fears, her desperate hopes, her unbearable guilt over those 7 minutes on the phone. Bobby listened to it all with those blue eyes full of compassion. He held Margaret's hand. He told her it wasn't her fault, that the monster who did this was the only one to blame. and no one noticed the cruel irony. Thomas returned to work in the third week, forced by financial necessity, but Bobby continued to visit Margaret regularly. Sometimes he brought flowers from his garden. Other times just his silent presence as Margaret wept, clutching Teddy. The community began to speak of Bobby Jensen with reverence. A true Christian, the church ladies would say. A man with a pure heart, praised Pastor Thompson. The kind of person who restores our faith in humanity, wrote the local newspaper in a profile on dedicated volunteers. Bobby was photographed several times during the searches. Images of him holding flashlights, coordinating groups, consoling the family. One photo in particular would be preserved in the Millbrook Gazette's archive. Bobby Jensen and Thomas Carter, side by side, looking at a map, united in their purpose to find Emily. 58 years later, that photograph would make investigators feel sick. As October turned to November, and November to December, reality began to set in. Emily Carter was likely dead. The FBI, which had been called in during the first week, began treating the case as a presumed homicide, though there was no body. Margaret refused to accept it. She kept Emily's room untouched. She made her daughter's favorite breakfast every morning. She opened the door dozens of times a day, hoping to see her little girl with brown curls running across the yard. Bobby was always there, always present, always kind, always offering a shoulder to cry on, words of comfort, prayers full of hope. He became part of the Carter family in a way that no one questioned. It was natural. It was appropriate. Bobby loved that family. Everyone saw it. What no one saw was that Bobby Jensen visited another place with the same regularity. A secret place. A place where Emily Carter had spent her last terrified moments. In January 1967, 3 months after the disappearance, the active investigation essentially stopped. The FBI kept the case open, but with no new leads, no body, no physical evidence beyond an open door and a wet teddy bear, there was no direction to follow. Sheriff Hayes continued to receive sightings of Emily for years. A similar-looking girl in Michigan, another in Texas. None were Emily Carter. Each false alarm was fresh torture for Margaret and Thomas. Bobby was present for every one of those moments. He drove Margaret to Michigan when she insisted on seeing for herself the girl, who was not her daughter. He held her when she collapsed upon seeing that once again it wasn't Emily. The community of Millbrook eventually had to move on, as communities always do. Life goes on, even when a part of you remains frozen in that last moment before the unthinkable. But Bobby Jensen never stopped visiting the Carters, even as years turned into decades, even as others pulled away, uncomfortable with the unending grief. Bobby remained faithful, constant, reliable. In 1975, when Thomas Carter died of a heart attack at 41, his heart literally broken by the loss of his daughter, it was Bobby who organized the funeral, who held Margaret as she buried her husband, who ensured she would not be alone. In 1989, when Margaret was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's, it was Bobby who visited her at the nursing home, who held her hand as she, increasingly confused, asked for her dead husband and her missing daughter. Bobby Jensen was the last guardian of Emily Carter's memory, the last one who still visited her empty grave in the Millbrook Cemetery, where a small headstone simply read, Emily Rose Carter, 1963-1966, forever in our hearts. He placed flowers there every week, without fail, for decades. People saw this and wept at the pure goodness of that man, at the loyalty that transcended time, at the love he clearly had for that shattered family. No one realized it wasn't love. It was satisfaction. It was possession. It was the sick pleasure of being so close to the pain he himself had caused, of being celebrated for the crime he committed, of controlling the narrative completely. Bobby Jensen visited that empty grave knowing exactly where the body was. Every flower he placed was a silent affirmation of his power. Every tear he shed was pure theater. And Millbrook, an innocent and trusting town, never suspected a thing. Margaret Carter died in 1994, at the age of 56, without ever knowing what happened to her daughter. Her last words, according to the nurses present, were, "Emily, is that you, darling?" Bobby Jensen was in the room. He held Margaret's hand until the end. And then, for the first time in decades, he was completely free. The only ones who might have recognized some detail, some inconsistency, some flaw in his perfect mask, were dead. The Emily Carter case became history, an urban legend, Millbrook's unsolved mystery that people mentioned occasionally but no longer actively talked about. Bobby Jensen continued his quiet life. He retired from the school in 1995. He lived alone, gardening, attending community events, going to church. A kind, beloved, respected old man, and his secret seemed perfectly safe. Forever, but in 2024, 58 years after that rainy October day, an impossible combination of events would begin to unravel the truth. An old teddy bear, technology that didn't exist in 1966, and an accidental discovery that would cause the hero of Millbrook to finally be seen for what he truly was. Monster. Transition from Block 2. For 58 years, Robert Jensen lived two lives. One public, admired, respected. The other secret, dark, monstrous. And he would have taken his secret to the grave if not for a series of improbable events that began in March 2024, when a construction crew started excavating the vacant lot on Old Mill Road. The lot on Old Mill Road had been abandoned since the 1950s, when the old Hutchinson sawmill closed. For decades it was just tall grass, wild trees, and a rotting wooden structure that was once a storage shed. The children of Millbrook grew up hearing the place was haunted, though no one knew exactly why. It was just one of those places small communities avoid for no apparent reason. In March 2024, the Millbrook Development Corporation bought the land. Ambitious plans, a 12-unit residential complex, parking, a green space. Urban. Renewal. Progress. On March 12th, the excavators began their work. On March 14th, at 10:37 in the morning, the operator, Miguel Santos, stopped his machine abruptly. Something had appeared in the churned-up earth, something that shouldn't have been there. Bones, small, clearly human, clearly from a child. The Millbrook police were called immediately. The new sheriff, James Martinez, 42, who had grown up hearing stories about the Emily Carter case, felt a shiver run down his spine when he saw those bones. The FBI was notified within 24 hours. A full forensic team arrived from Boston. The site was cordoned off. Forensic anthropologists began to work meticulously, excavating by hand, sifting through every inch of soil. Over 5 days, they recovered a nearly complete skeleton. Female, between 3 and 4 years of age at the time of death. Buried for decades, likely between 50 and 60 years, based on decomposition and soil characteristics. And next to the bones, preserved almost miraculously in a pocket of less acidic soil, protected by fragments of plastic-like fabric, a brown teddy bear with a red ribbon around its neck. Teddy. The lead forensic anthropologist Dr. Richard Chen held the bear with gloved hands, carefully removing decades of dirt. The red ribbon, though faded and stained, was still identifiable. The bear itself, despite the time, retained recognizable features. "We need to compare this with old case files," Dr. Chen told Sheriff Martinez. "This burial was deliberate. It wasn't an accident. Someone put this child here with her toy." Martinez was already reviewing files. And when he opened the yellowed folder marked Carter, Emily Rose, 1966, disappearance, and saw the black and white photo of a little girl holding a brown teddy bear with a red ribbon, his heart almost stopped. The news exploded in Millbrook. After 58 years, Emily Carter had been found. DNA analysis confirmed it within a week. The remains were a match to mitochondrial DNA preserved from a baby tooth Margaret Carter had kept in a memory box, now owned by a distant cousin. Still living in New Hampshire, it was Emily, without a doubt. The town entered a state of renewed mourning. People who weren't even born in 1966 wept. The mystery that had haunted Millbrook for nearly 6 decades finally had a partial answer. Emily Carter was dead. She had been dead since 1966, buried less than 2 miles from her home. But the most important question remained: who? The FBI formed a special task force. Special Agent Sarah Thornton, 38, a cold case specialist, took the lead. She knew that after 58 years, physical evidence would be limited. Witnesses would be dead or have failing memories. The killer was likely dead too, but she had something the investigators of 1966 did not: modern forensic technology. The bones were examined minutely. Cause of death: asphyxiation, based on fractures to the hyoid bone. Minimal pre-mortem trauma, suggesting the death was relatively quick. No obvious evidence of sexual abuse on the skeletal remains, though. After so much time, it couldn't be completely ruled out. Teddy the bear was sent to the most advanced FBI forensic lab in Quantico, Virginia. There, technicians worked with equipment that seemed like science fiction compared to 1966. Using state-of-the-art mass spectrometry and touch DNA extraction techniques, they began to look for microscopic traces: skin cells, dried sweat, any biological material that might have survived. And they found it. On an area of the bear's neck, protected by the synthetic fabric ribbon that had acted as a partial barrier against decomposition, there were preserved epidermal cells. Not from Emily. Her DNA was already catalogued. From someone else. Someone who had held that bear, who had touched its neck, whose skin cells had transferred to the fabric and, against all odds, survived for nearly 6 decades. The extraction was difficult. The DNA was degraded, fragmented, but the team managed to create a partial profile, enough to run through CODIS, the FBI's national DNA database. No direct match. The profile didn't hit on any known criminals in the system. But Agent Thornton didn't give up. She knew of a newer technique: forensic genetic genealogy, the same method that had caught the Golden State Killer in 2018. With a court order, the partial DNA profile was sent to specialized labs that use public genealogy databases: GED Match, Family Tree DNA, Ancestry, and there, technology did what seemed impossible. On April 17, 2024, the genealogical search yielded results. The DNA from the bear shared markers with several people in the databases. After weeks of painstaking work, forensic genealogists constructed a family tree. The DNA belonged to someone from the Jensen family, a family with deep roots in Millbrook, stretching back to the early 1900s. Agent Thornton started investigating. The Jensen family had been small. Most members were dead or had moved away decades ago. But one name kept appearing in Millbrook's records: Robert Bobby Jensen, 92 years old. Still alive. Still residing in Millbrook, in the same modest house on Maple Street where he'd lived since the 1950s. Thornton read the 1966 case file. She saw Bobby Jensen's name again and again. Dedicated volunteer, friend of the family, tireless helper, the tragedy's unofficial hero. She read about how Bobby had been present at every turn, how he had access to the operations center, how he knew the investigation's every move, how he had comforted the family for decades. And she felt that sensation every experienced investigator knows, that chill in her spine that says, it's him. But she needed more. Partial DNA from a teddy bear wouldn't be enough for a court, especially with the potential for contamination of old evidence. She needed Robert Jensen's current DNA for a direct comparison. On April 24th, Agent Thornton and her team showed up at the Millbrook Baptist Church during the Wednesday community coffee hour. Bobby Jensen, now a 92-year-old man, with white hair, a stooped back, but still bright blue eyes, was there, smiling, chatting with acquaintances. Thornton watched him from a distance, a beloved, respected man who had lived a lifetime of apparent kindness. She saw him pick up a paper cup of coffee, drink from it, place the empty cup on the table. Minutes later, when Bobby left to use the restroom, Thornton, wearing gloves, collected that cup. Fresh DNA, saliva, buccal cells. It would be enough. The analysis took 5 days. The lab worked on maximum priority. On April 29th, 2024, the results came in. A positive match. The DNA from Bobby Jensen's coffee cup matched the partial DNA from Emily Carter's teddy bear with 99.97% statistical certainty. Robert Jensen had held that bear. He had been with Emily Carter. He was present when she died. And he had buried her body with the toy she loved so much. Agent Thornton sat at her temporary desk in the Millbrook Police Department, looking at a photo of Bobby Jensen from 1966, young, smiling, holding a flashlight during the search, next to a recent photo of him at the church. 58 years. He had lived 58 years free, admired, loved, while Emily Carter rotted in the earth less than 2 miles from her home. Thornton picked up her badge and weapon. "Let's go get him," she said to Sheriff Martinez. It was time for Robert Jensen to finally answer for what he did on that rainy October day in 1966. When the police arrived at Bobby Jensen's house at 6:15 a.m. on April 30th, 2024, he was eating breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast, orange juice. The same routine he'd kept for decades. He saw the cars through the window. He saw Agent Thornton and Sheriff Martinez walking up to his door. And for the first time in 58 years, Bobby Jensen's mask trembled. He knew. Somehow, after all this time, they knew. Robert Jensen opened the door before they could knock. He was dressed as he always was, khaki cotton pants, a blue plaid shirt, suspenders. The same suspenders he'd worn for decades. His face was calm, but his hands shook. Slightly. "Agent Thornton," he said, his voice still firm despite his age. "Sheriff Martinez. I figured you'd come eventually." Thornton studied him. 92 years old. Frail in appearance, but there was something in his eyes. It wasn't fear. It was almost relief. "Mr. Jensen, we need you to come with us to answer some questions about Emily Carter," Thornton said, keeping her voice professional. Bobby nodded slowly. "Can I finish my coffee first? And get my coat? It's a bit chilly this morning." The politeness of the question was surreal, as if they were inviting him for a drive, not arresting him for murder. "Of course," Martinez replied, though his hand was near his weapon. At 92, Bobby Jensen didn't look threatening, but Martinez had read enough about serial killers to know that appearances deceive. Bobby went back inside. They followed, keeping a respectful but vigilant distance. The house was impeccably clean. Simple. Furniture from decades ago well-maintained. Pictures on the walls. Bobby at community events. Bobby at church. Bobby smiling with neighbors over the years. No pictures of Emily Carter. No obvious trophies. Nothing to suggest the monster he hid. Bobby took the last sip of his coffee, placed the plate in the sink, and washed it carefully. Then he took a brown coat hanging near the door and a gray felt hat. "I'm ready," he said. "I won't resist. There's no point." At the Millbrook police station, Bobby Jensen was taken to the main interrogation room. Gray walls, a metal table, uncomfortable chairs, a camera in the corner. The classic setting. Thornton read him his Miranda rights. Bobby listened intently, nodding at each point. "Do you understand these rights as I've explained them?" Thornton asked. "Yes." "Do you wish to have an attorney present?" Bobby thought for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "No. I've carried this long enough. 58 years is a long time to live with a secret like this." Thornton activated the recorder. "This interview is being recorded. Today is April 30th, 2024, at 7:42 a.m. Present are Special Agent Sarah Thornton, Sheriff James Martinez, and the interviewee, Robert Charles Jensen. Mr. Jensen, you have chosen to waive legal representation. Is that correct?" "Yes." "You understand that anything you say can and will be used against you?" "I understand." Thornton leaned forward. "Mr. Jensen, we found Emily Carter. You knew that? I read it in the papers. Everyone in Millbrook knows. We found DNA on her teddy bear. Teddy, your DNA." Bobby showed no surprise. He just looked down at his hands, the same hands that had strangled a 3-year-old girl decades ago. "I didn't know that was possible," he said softly. After so long, DNA. It didn't exist in 1966, not like this. I thought I was safe. Safe? Martinez repeated, his voice thick with barely contained anger. A 3-year-old girl died. Bobby looked up, and for the first time, something broke in his expression. Not quite remorse, but recognition. I know, he said, I know what I am. I've always known. What followed was a confession that lasted 4 hours. Bobby Jensen, as if a dam had broken after nearly 6 decades, told them everything. He spoke of his childhood, the only son of strict religious parents, growing up in Saniar, Millbrook in the 1930s and 40s. He always knew he was different. He always felt an attraction to children, specifically girls between 3 and 5 years old. He fought against these feelings for years. He prayed. He fasted. He tried to suppress what he called my sickness. For years, he managed to control it. He worked at the school, went to church, and lived an outward life of absolute normality. He never married. He said he couldn't. It wouldn't be fair to a woman, considering his inclinations. But the attraction never went away. It grew stronger. Emily Carter was his neighbor's daughter. Bobby had known her since she was born. He watched her grow. And when she was 3 years old in October 1966, something inside him finally broke. It wasn't planned, Bobby said, his voice a monotone, almost dissociated. I never planned to hurt her. I just wanted to be near her, to touch her. Hair. Nothing more. I swore to myself I would never go further than that. On that afternoon of October 18th, as Emily was playing in her own yard, Bobby walked over. I called to her, Bobby continued. I told her I had found a kitten in my yard and asked if she wanted to see. She loved animals. Of course she said yes. Emily went with him, trusting, smiling, holding her teddy bear, Teddy. Bobby led her to his basement. He told her the kitten was down there. When they got downstairs, there was no kitten. Emily became confused. She started asking where it was. I touched her hair, Bobby said, closing his eyes. Just that. I just wanted to feel it, but she got scared. She started to scream, said she was going to tell her mommy. Panic took over. Bobby couldn't let her tell. Everything would be revealed. His life would be over. I put my hands on her throat, he said, opening his eyes, looking directly at Thornton. I didn't want to kill her, just make her stop screaming, but she kept fighting, kept trying to scream. And I squeezed harder. Emily Carter stopped struggling after less than a minute. Her small body went limp in Bobby Jensen's hands. She was still holding Teddy. Bobby kept the body in the basement for hours, panicking, trying to decide what to do. He heard the sirens starting, the searches. He knew he had little time. At night, around 2 a.m., when the searches had temporarily died down, he put Emily's body in a bag, along with Teddy. He couldn't separate them, and drove to the old sawmill on Old Mill Road. He dug a grave by the light of a flashlight. He buried Emily there, covered it all carefully, went back home, cleaned everything. And the next morning, when he went to volunteer for the search, Bobby Jensen looked Margaret and Thomas Carter in the eye and lied. I had to be there, he explained. I had to know what the police were thinking, what they had found. I needed to maintain control. And for 58 years, he did. He comforted the family. He attended vigils. He lived as a pillar of the community. I never did it again, Bobby said, his voice breaking for the first time. I swear to God, I never touched another child. I fought the urge every day for the next 58 years, but I never did it again. Thornton didn't know if she believed him. Psychopaths could be convincing, but something in his voice suggested that maybe, just maybe, he was telling the truth about that. Not that it mattered. Once was enough. At 11:47 a.m., Bobby Jensen signed his written confession. 23 detailed pages. Every moment of that terrible day in October 1966. Every decision. Every lie. Every year lived with the weight of Emily Carter on his conscience. What happens now? He asked when he finished. You'll be formally charged with murder in the first degree, Thornton said. You'll go to trial. You will likely spend the rest of your life in prison." Bobby nodded. "How much time do you think I have? I'm 92. Diabetes. Heart problems. I don't know," Thornton said honestly. "Maybe a few years. Maybe less." "Good enough," Bobby Jensen said. "At least I won't die free." Emily Carter deserved justice, even 58 years late. He was taken away, processed, placed in a holding cell. The news exploded in Millbrook that afternoon. Bobby Jensen, the pillar of the community, the tireless volunteer, the friend to all, a child killer all along. The town went into collective shock. How could they not have seen? How did he fool everyone for nearly 6 decades? Margaret Carter, now 88, received the news in her nursing home. She wept, her nurses said. But there was also a strange peace. Finally, after 58 years, she knew. She knew what happened to her Emily. She knew who took her little girl from her. And he would pay. Too late for true justice. But he would pay. The trial of Robert Jensen was scheduled to begin in September 2024. But Bobby Jensen would not live to see the courtroom. On June 17, 2024, at 3:32 a.m., he suffered a massive heart attack in his cell. He died on the way to the hospital. He was 92. His last word, according to the paramedics, was a name: Emily. Robert Jensen died on June 17, 2024, at 3:47 a.m. at Millbrook General Hospital. Massive heart attack. His last word was Emily. Some said it was remorse. Others, that it was fear of the final judgment that awaited him. But for the Carter family and the town of Millbrook, his death represented something more complex. Incomplete justice. He had confessed. He had admitted his monstrous crime, but he would never be judged. He would never spend a single day in prison for what he did. Death had spared him from the system that should have punished him. The news of Bobby Jensen's death reached Agent Thornton at 4:15 a.m. via a call from Sheriff Martinez. "He's gone," Martinez said, his voice tired. "Heart attack during the night." The paramedic said he mumbled Emily before he lost consciousness. Thornton hung up and stared at the ceiling of her dark room. 58 years, investigating, building the case, finally arresting the person responsible. And now he was dead. Before the trial, before a single real legal consequence. Justice? Maybe. But it felt incomplete. The reaction in Millbrook was complex and divided. "He helped me when my husband died," said Eleanor Walsh, 86. "He mowed my lawn every week for 15 years. How can someone like that be a monster?" But others felt anger that Jensen had escaped. "He should have rotted in prison," said Thomas Carter Jr., 62, Emily's older brother, in an interview with the Millbrook Daily News. "He should have spent his last years in a cell, thinking about what he did. Instead, he lived free for 58 years. Emily never got any of that. She was 3. Margaret Carter, now in palliative care for advanced cancer, received the news in silence. Her nurse said she just nodded, looked out the window and murmured, "May God have mercy on him, because I have none." The district attorney Michael Brennan held a press conference on June 18, 2024. "The death of Robert Jensen closes this case in a way no one anticipated," Brennan said. "He fully confessed to the murder of Emily Carter. His confession was detailed, corroborated by physical evidence and legally valid. However, due to his death, there will never be a trial. Technically, in the eyes of the law, Robert Jensen dies innocent until proven guilty." "He confessed," someone in the audience shouted. "How can he be considered innocent?" Brennan held up his hands for calm. "I understand the frustration, but our system operates on the principle of the presumption of innocence. Without a trial and verdict, there is no legal conviction. This does not mean we believe he was innocent. It just means the process was not completed. It was a legal distinction that brought little comfort to those who had hoped to see justice carried out in a courtroom." On June 25th, Thornton visited Margaret Carter one last time. Margaret was visibly more fragile. The cancer was advancing quickly. Doctors said she had weeks, maybe days. "Agent Thornton," Margaret said, her voice weak but clear. "Thank you for not giving up on Emily, for bringing her home. Thornton held her hand gently. I wish we could have done more. I wish he had faced a trial. Margaret shook her head slowly. He faced something greater. He carried the weight of Emily for 58 years. I saw it in his eyes that morning when he knocked on my door, pretending to help. He knew what he had done, and he lived with it every day. That's its own kind of prison. Did you forgive him? Thornton asked. Margaret was silent for a long time. No, I don't know if I ever can, but I don't carry hatred anymore either. I'm too tired. I just want peace. I just want peace. To see my Emily again. Tears welled in Thornton's eyes. If there's any justice in the universe, you will. Margaret Carter died on July 3, 2024 at 6:22 a.m., with her family around her. She was 88. She had lived 58 years without her daughter, but she died knowing the truth. The funeral was held at the Millbrook Methodist Church, the same church where Emily's memorial had been held in 1966. Hundreds attended. Margaret's casket was placed next to a large photo of Emily Carter at age 3, smiling, holding Teddy. Her son, Thomas Jr., gave the eulogy. My mother never gave up, he said, his voice breaking. For 58 years she waited for answers, waited for justice. And finally, in the last months of her life, she received the answers at least. Emily was found. The man who took her from us was identified. It's not the complete justice we wanted, but it's something. And now, my mother and my sister are together again. Margaret Carter was buried next to Emily in the Millbrook Cemetery, their headstones side by side. Mother and daughter, reunited. In the following months, Millbrook slowly began to process and heal. Bobby Jensen's house was sold in August 2024. The new family demolished it completely and built a new house on the lot. They wanted to erase any trace of the man who had lived there. The Millbrook Historical Society created a small memorial in the town's Central Park. A simple plaque, in memory of Emily Rose Carter, 1963-1966. Lost too soon. Never. Forgotten. And to all victims of unsolved crimes, your stories deserve to be told. Thornton returned to Quantico and continued her work on cold cases. But the Carter case stayed with her in a way few other cases had. In September 2024, she gave a lecture at a law enforcement conference in Chicago. Solving a case is not the same as getting justice, she said. Emily Carter was found. Her killer was identified. He confessed, but he was never judged. Is it satisfying? Not completely. Is it justice? In a way, yes. But it's imperfect. Sometimes justice is imperfect, but it is still worth seeking. In October 2024, on the 58th anniversary of Emily Carter's disappearance, a small ceremony was held at the Millbrook Cemetery. Thomas Carter Jr. placed flowers on the headstones of his mother and sister. Emily, Thomas said, kneeling between the two graves, you can finally rest, and Mom, thank you for never giving up on her. You both deserve peace now. The autumn wind blew through the cemetery trees. Leaves fell gently on the headstones, and for the first time in 58 years, it seemed like Millbrook could finally begin to let go. The case of Emily Carter remains officially classified as closed, suspect deceased. Robert Jensen's confession is filed away in FBI records. His guilt is known, documented, and undeniable. But without a trial, without a verdict, there is an implicit asterisk. Was justice served? Maybe. Completely? Never. 58 years is a long time to wait for answers. And when they finally come, they are sometimes not exactly what we expected. But for Emily Rose Carter, who disappeared on an October afternoon in 1966 at 3 years of age, clutching her teddy bear, Teddy, at least her story was told. She was found, she was brought home, and finally, she can rest in peace beside the mother who never stopped looking for her. Sometimes that has to be enough.